Right.
Oh, hi there.
Hi, fancy seeing you here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So is there anything we need to chat about before everybody comes? Although, of course, if we do, it'll be on the recording, so perhaps it's not necessarily appropriate. Anyway, I'm glad we got Hans lined up for Monday. That should be good.
Yes, indeed.
I just thought it would be easier to talk to him before he starts trying to make sense of all the stuff that's in the drop boxes.
Yeah.
You know, a bit of a pointer on the way through might be helpful.
Yes, some that's coming together, some that isn't.
Quite. What's the other thing I was going to ask you? Oh, did you get back to, I can't think who it was. It was Jasmina about tomorrow. You were, I think.
Oh dear, I think the answer is no. What was I supposed to be doing? So I was fallen off the...
Let me see if I can. There was, she sent you an email, you said there was an email from her saying we need to respond. Now we know that Miriam's going ahead tomorrow, and Jasmina had said she probably couldn't be there.
Oh, about the interventions, yeah.
Yeah.
I know a couple of people seem to be thinking of joining us. They're doing things to the Dropbox.
Oh, okay. Well, certainly I was just reading in the last couple of minutes, reading the 7.4 that Ben and TJ have put in, which looks good. Yeah, so I just thought I'd forgotten about, I mean, if we'd thought about it, we could have mentioned it to Jasmina this morning, but I didn't think about it. It had dropped you off your list, so.
Oh dear.
Do you remember you sent her an email entitled vaccination, but actually it wasn't, it was about other interventions.
Oh, right, yes, it was, wasn't it? Right.
Is that okay? I mean, I can do it if you've lost it.
I'm just finding it.
Or I can send it to you again, whichever. You sent me a message on the 26th, which was the day you had Jasmina's message.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, so what am I saying? If she...
Well, I think we're
there's time to drop in.
We're doing, it'll go ahead tomorrow because Miriam has confirmed that she'll be there.
Yes. Can she?
But if she can join next week, but she might be able to catch up on by listening to the recording.
Yes.
But as with today's discussion, I think it's really getting her input of useful people and problems from the coalface, as it were, isn't it? Although Miriam may be better integrated, though I'm not sure how well she, how much she's involved with the day-to-day response to government, as opposed to more general issues of modelling interventions. But we'll find out tomorrow anyway. I don't know how quickly I imagine that recordings that are made tomorrow won't be up till after the weekend, because I think it requires Arnold or somebody to do something. You know, I don't think it's an automatic thing. I think that requires personal intervention. with or without a mask.
So is it tomorrow? Is it 2 p.m.?
It's 2 p.m. Yes, that was the time that. Did you attend today's economics?
Yes.
Did they change the time for next week, as Sean was suggesting?
I think the suggestion was it should be 4 p.m.
Yeah, I just wondered. Well, hopefully, if that was discussed, it'll go in tomorrow's bulletin.
It was just Kira was there, so hopefully she'll get to keep that straight.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering.
Otherwise, it was just Eli Fennicle, is he, and Nick Hanley.
Okay.
Quite a good discussion, but
yeah. Good. Well, it just means I need to change it in my diary if that is moving. I mean, it means it runs into this one, but on the other hand, now what's this message saying? I'm online on Zoom, but somebody isn't online, not in our Zoom anyway. Who's that from?
Where's this message?
It's on the Slack channel. It's just come in. It's from Luke.
Yes. Can you send him the bulletin or point him to the bulletin?
I'll try and send him the link.
I'll try and write this letter, the email to Jasmina.
Right, now let me just.
Are we really suggesting Jasmina might otherwise contact Miriam?
If she wants to, yeah, maybe. To find out where she might fit in. Sorry, let me just get back to Luke. Oh, damn, I've got it in twice. Any sign of Luke? Oh, we've got Ben. That's good. Excellent.
And TJ sent some stuff around and put it in the Dropbox. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I was just reading this stuff that the two of you have done on section 4. Looks really good. Now we've got Luke as well. That's good. Yeah, I haven't only had 5 minutes to read it just now, but I thought it looked really good. And the only thing was just to make, and it's a matter for all of these things, is to exactly how we're going to sort of, you know, highlight the actual challenges.
Yeah, definitely.
But other than that, great, Luke, you found us. Sorry, I don't know quite what happened there, but the link that I just sent you will be the right link for all the meetings. If they're a scheduled meeting in the bulletin, that's the link. Cool. And it won't change.
I will use this from now on. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you can put that somewhere where you know, but I'm sorry, we've changed it round a lot, but now now we seem to have converged on a simple system. So
Good. No worries.
I think it was before, when there were so many people involved, the Institute wanted to sort of constrain who had access to what a little bit. But now it's a much smaller group of us that are using them. I think they're happy to just give us the link and we use it as and when we want it. At least I think that's my
we can
reading.
actually use this virtual room any time of the day to...
we can. If we use this one, it gets recorded, but I think we can use it anytime. But there is another virtual link that doesn't get recorded. That's really a better one for just using any time for sort of informal discussions with people. Do you have that? Do you get the bulletin?
I do, yes.
Okay,
and I have the link for ad hoc meetings in
that's
here.
right. So that's the one. So if you just, I mean, Dennis and I have just fixed up to talk to somebody on Monday, and I've just sent them that link, and we'll use that one. So that's quite a good one to use.
I'll make a note.
Yeah. So we've got Phil joining us later, if possible.
He is. Okay.
Well, he says he's on another call and will join later if possible.
Yeah, I was in touch with him. He said he probably wouldn't make it, or he might not make it, and asked me to present on our behalf.
Well, that would be great. And Glenn has just sent one saying that he's stuck. He'll join later if he can, but might be obviously not like to finish imminently. Sorry, I've lost the picture for a minute. So what's the most useful thing to do now? I mean, obviously, to hear what Luke and Phil David have been talking about. Oh, good, we've got Joshua now too, so welcome. I'm not quite sure whether it's worth. So TJ, am I right thinking TJ is unlikely to be joining us? I mean, is there anybody else?
He sent an email with that document to myself and Glenn about 4 o'clock, just before 4.
Okay.
Just explained it, but he didn't say anything about the meeting specifically.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering whether Luke should tell us what he's been discussing with Phil. I mean, it will get recorded so other people can catch up later, or if we thought anybody else was coming in the near future, maybe we should wait a minute. But Joshua, do you know anything about any of your people, like Daniela or Paul, or?
I only just remembered about this, which is why I'm a few minutes late, sorry.
Okay, but you haven't heard from anybody else as to whether they're likely to be able to come or not come, or? Okay.
No, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, that's fine. Well, shall we just? Oh, and we've got Jasmina. Well, that's good too. So I think probably we should go ahead and get started now. And Luke, we'll just wait till Jasmina's actually. We're sure she's with us, and then maybe.
I'm here. I'm just plugging my computer.
Great. So we haven't really got started yet. We're trying to sort of sort out who's coming and so on. But the basic points are that there's something in the Dropbox that's been put in the last hour or so from on 7.4 from Ben and TJ. And Luke has been talking to Phil David about the elicitation stuff and has got some comments to make, to sort of present to us. So we were going to start with that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. So I also put a document in the Dropbox that so Phil and I have been working on this in a separate folder, and then we didn't really discuss yet.
Oh, I've got it. Yes, it wasn't. Sorry, when I looked a minute ago, it wasn't there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So what we did was we separately worked on this. Phil earlier this week or previous week worked out some details on the bullets that I guess you guys discussed previously. And then he asked me to go through a guideline of the European Food Safety Association or Administration on eliciting expert knowledge and see how we can translate that or borrow stuff from for listing for such a guideline or identifying challenges in relation to transmission modeling.
Sorry, I remember we talked about that last time briefly. Was that a document you already knew about?
Nope.
So this was coming. So
I didn't know about it. David did, but
yeah. No, that's fine. So it'd be good to get you. I assumed you didn't, since it was a sort of British standards thing, but it'd be good to get your take on that too, from a sort of external perspective.
I thought it was a European thing, but
well, maybe it is. I don't.
Anyway, it is a 200-something page document. I didn't read all of it. I wrote the introduction and executive summary and identified some sections that I need to or still want to read. What I did thus far is to identify the critical steps in a expert knowledge elicitation process, identify the key persons and processes and choices that are made along that process. And I started thinking about what kind of things we might want to elicit expert knowledge about and how that might impact different choices that you make within such a process. And I tried to summarize this in the Word document that is called 7.5 Challenges and then today's date with Philip's and my initials. And the first page is basically what Philip did before, which is a more prose. It's more of a general introduction.
Yep.
And
yep.
It's probably best if everybody just reads that at their own leisure. What jumped out at me from that text is that apparently there is the notion in elicitation practice that it is better or easier to elicit knowledge about readily observable or measurable quantities like number of hospital cases or deaths, which I think in the case of food safety is something that makes a lot of sense. However, in transmission modeling, these things are actually the outcome of a whole complex transmission process. So I thought to myself, okay, it may be hard to elicit knowledge about more abstract things like R naught or what is another example? Well, anything that is somewhere hidden in a model. But then on the other hand, there are also very basic mechanistic quantities that drive transmission that you can actually observe. So I started thinking about how can we divide the model components or parameters in types of parameters that we might consider different in terms of strengths and challenges when you elicit expert knowledge from them. And I tried to summarize this in the table at the end of your document, table 1. And what I did is basically define a space of, or 4 groups of types of parameters, the observables and the ones that are difficult or impossible to observe, and then quantities that relate to transmission mechanics or the outcomes of transmission. And with transmission mechanics, I basically mean anything that the parameter of the model that governs a process, like the incubation time, the duration of infectiousness, the duration of immunity, whereas outcomes of transmission, something that the model might predict, would be case numbers, deaths, seroprevalence, the doubling time. So those are more concrete, real life things. Then on the other hand, there are unfortunately many transmission mechanistic things that are, I think, difficult to observe or quantify. And this is actually where I think the elicitation process may actually be most difficult, but also important if we want to consider these factors, like transmission networks, the mobility patterns, actual contact rates and transmission probabilities, variation between individuals, the effect of interventions, as we are seeing with COVID-19 now. It's quite challenging to disentangle the effects of different components of the general lockdown measures. And in the bottom right is the category of outcomes of transmission mechanics, or outcomes of transmission that are difficult or impossible to observe. And I could only think of two really, and that's the reproductive number and the generation time, which themselves are not really parameters of the model. They're like abstract summaries of the process, and they're actually quite difficult to observe. For instance, serial time is, I think, easier to observe than the generation time. If you disagree, I'm happy to discuss that. This was a first stab at organizing all of these parameters. In addition to that, I made a summary of what, according to the European Food Safety Association, should be the steps in a elicitation process. And it was very interesting to read. I learned quite some interesting stuff about it. What it basically boils down to is that they advise you to establish 3 entities within this process. The first being the working group, who first identifies that there is a risk and gathers available evidence, and then frames the question that the elicitation process is supposed to answer. Then the second entity is the steering group, which is composed of some members of the working group and some of the elicitors, so the people who will later on actually do the knowledge elicitation with the experts. And the steering group is supposed to identify and prioritize the parameters that address the questions identified by the working group. And it is important here to identify the most important parameters, because doing a full expert knowledge elicitation is a lot of work, and doing it for all parameters in a model, in a mathematical model, might not be the best use of time. So they propose to prioritize and do a minimal assessment for the least important parameters. Then a challenge is to actually set up the questions that you want to ask the experts. And you have to think about what the expert is going to answer and in what quantity they're going, what is the unit, or on what scale or universe are we talking about when we ask questions. For instance, do we want to have their knowledge expressed in probabilities or in durations or rates? Then given these questions, we need to choose an elicitation method, and they describe 3 major methods, and this is something that I still have to read up on. And I'm hoping that, or not hoping, I'm anticipating that some of these methods work better for some quantities of interest than others. So it will be interesting to map these 3 methods to the 4 groups of quantities that I identified thus far. And then the last task of the steering group is to actually identify and train the experts who are going to be elicited for their knowledge. And the third group is the elicitation group, or the elicitor. And they actually interact with the experts. And in this framework, they elicit the expert knowledge in the form of probability distributions, or that is at least the goal, to quantify the expert knowledge in terms of a probability distribution. And they provide like examples of how you might do that based on a cumulative distribution function, asking the expert, for instance, what do you think is the probability that a person has more than so and so many days of symptoms? Possibly combined with other methods, for instance, based on a probability density function, or even a standard distribution like a normal distribution, asking your expert what the mean and the standard deviation might be. And this is a kind of iterative process where the elicitor can try to elicit the expert knowledge through these three different approaches, and then confront the expert by transforming the knowledge from, for instance, the CDF to the PDF, and see whether and somehow like converge to a final elicitation for that particular expert. Some general challenges here is actually preparing the experts for elicitation. There are some ways to do that. Where there is a way to train your experts. I thought I made a note of it, but I can't find it right here. But you can train your experts with a training elicitation where you actually know the true value, and you can kind of benchmark your expert. Another challenge is actually integrating the knowledge of multiple experts, who may disagree. And apparently these experts' judgments can be biased based on the way their knowledge is elicited. Then I wrote down some additional details on the challenge of aggregating the results of multiple experts. There are ways to do that via consensus, which they call a behavioral approach, where you let the experts interact. There's even a framework for that called Sheffield Elicitation Framework. Or you can take a mathematical approach where the elicitor only, or the expert only interacts with the elicitor and not with the other experts. But there the challenge is how much weight you give to each expert. And this is where that benchmarking of the expert's ability to translate their knowledge to a probability distribution comes into play, where you can assess the expert's performance by kind of a test elicitation procedure, which is called Cook's method, I think. Yeah. Yeah, then there are some general things about documenting, which I don't think is very interesting for this paper, but it was part of the framework, so I thought I might just mention it in there. And then a general recommendation from this guideline is that the guideline itself does not provide enough expertise and experience to start doing these elicitation procedures, and that you actually need training. So I guess the challenge is to actually develop that expertise and experience.
So when we, well, in various points in the discussions of this, and the whole business about including expert elicitation and also uncertainty quantification, and both of those, we've talked about having not only the challenge paper and trying to keep it all together, but potentially having accompanying more sort of expository papers on the method, something on UQ demonstrating it, and also something on expert elicitation. Did you and Phil talk about that at all? Because it seems to me that quite a lot of what you're talking about here might be better in either an appendix or an accompanying paper, whichever way you want to think about it.
We haven't talked about it yet. We both were busy. This was a first stab at immersing myself in the material, and I agree it's far too detailed to go into a challenge paper, but at least I was hoping that we can distill some general challenges from this.
No, I'm sure that's true, but I think it might be quite useful while you're thinking about that to also think about, you know, can we divide this up into something that sort of is written on the assumption that the general methods are understood, or the broad ideas are understood, and sort of distill out the challenges while supporting that with something much more detailed. And I think Phil originally was hoping that there was some work with Will Probert that might do that. So I don't know whether this fits with that at all, but I'm just asking, really.
Philip did send me and Will an email, and Will responded. He was enthusiastic to still be involved. He said he didn't have time today, but he was going to go he would look at the document. So that's
So
what I
that's
know.
so that's good. So hopefully something along those lines might work. And I mean, the journal is very open to having additional papers if, you know, it makes sense in this special issue. So that's not a problem.
So what kind of high level, how high level should this be? Are you thinking about one paragraph about this topic, or 2 or 3? How many words should we?
Oh, well, I think this is, I don't know. I haven't thought this is, I mean, it's an important part of the whole thing. I mean, if we look at what TJ and Ben have been working on, and others probably with 7.4, it's, I don't know, I can't remember now, is it 2 or 3 pages? I did have it open a minute ago.
There's kind of my contribution and TJ's contribution together, so that probably needs whittling down and combining.
But we'd be thinking about probably at least a couple of pages a section, I would think. So.
Wow, that long.
So, well, it's whatever it takes, really. I mean, some topics are going to be longer than others, and of course, if there is an accompanying paper, that might change it too. But the important thing is to identify what the challenges are and how we think there can be. I mean, the whole idea of the papers is to think about challenges for the future and what work needs to be put in place, you know, in terms of quite major research projects sometimes. I think for the future. So I think, you know, if you keep that in your head, it's a question of identifying what the challenges are and how. I mean, we don't have to solve them. If we've got ideas, that's always helpful, pointers. But in order to say what the challenges are, you obviously have to say what the context is. So, you know, and some things take more to identify the context than others. So I think it's up to you to advise us really about what you and Phil and Will think is feasible.
We'll discuss that. I'm positive that we can distill some challenges for this.
Yeah.
Which is good.
So I think as a starting point, we were perhaps guessing that we were thinking of suggesting a limit perhaps of about 5,000 words, but again, if and 5,000 words might say be an introduction, 8 challenges, and a discussion at the end, each of 500 words. So, so if you call 500 words a sort of largish page in ordinary sort of terms, I think our original feeling was that if a challenge is fairly sharply defined, maybe half a page for a page should be enough. But then we've recognized as we've gone along that sometimes we've got more situation where a challenge may have a whole lot of sub-challenges to it, in which case you can quite imagine it might be appropriate to think of it as one challenge and give it a heading as one challenge, but it might actually be 2 or 3 pages or something. So, and I think, I mean, obviously well, first of all, for the authors themselves, the editing problem should be to try and keep their paper fairly balanced. So, you know, 2 things of equal importance. You don't want one taking up 6 pages and another one just 1 page or whatever. But I think the underlying rationale is a feeling that what we're trying to do is to try and give fairly sharp challenges to say, here is a research challenge, something that would be helpful for dealing with future pandemics if we could make progress on it. And a sort of feeling that if something is a sharply defined problem, it should be possible to explain the background with references and to say what the challenge is in at most about a page. But
I think,
but having said that, the papers do really vary very widely, and some which are very much like that, and others where it's difficult to persuade the authors not to be very diffuse.
But I think one of the challenges, or 2 of the challenges perhaps, that have come out of the discussions of this particular group has been that perhaps the methods of UQ and expert elucidation could be, and perhaps should have been, used much more than they have been so far. And if that's the case, then perhaps one of the roles is not only to say, you know, it would be a good idea, these methods are available and can contribute, but also perhaps to explain how in an accompanying paper, if they're not widely used or known about amongst the groups concerned. So I think that was a bit of the idea of having the sort of support papers. And that would vary. So I think, I mean, my guess is, I'm sticking my neck right out, so somebody, Jasmina or TJ or somebody, can slap me down, but I would guess that, you know, the methods, a lot of the statistical methodology that you're all using is pretty widely known and shared amongst the groups, but perhaps not everybody is so used to doing UQ for epidemics or something like that. But maybe that's not true. I'm just guessing.
I mean, coming in on that, my feeling is that there's, so particularly with the estimation, the calibration side, the thing is there's lots and lots and lots of techniques. And I think the thing is, it's not necessarily that one technique wins out in all situations. So, I mean, one example would be, so the UQ stuff that we're talking about with things like history matching and emulation, they're potentially very, very useful for fitting very complicated simulation models, but they also do have some limitations. So for example, you know, if you want to fit a data set with 10,000 individuals in it, you have to be prepared to condense that data set down to a set of summary measures, right? Because you can't build 10,000 emulators, or at least not very easily. So, whereas if you did something like data augmented MCMC, you could potentially do that, right? Because you can build likelihoods and you can integrate all of the missing information, and you can potentially get sort of very detailed predictions out of it. Now, I suspect that there's no sort of, if Peter or Ian were on the call or someone, then I suspect that they would be arguing that, you know, there might be overfitting in those sorts of models. But then on the other hand, you know, if you want to fit models of hospital infection and do predictions, that's exactly the sort of framework that you might want to use. So I think the thing is that depending on the context, there's lots of different approaches for doing it. I know that, you know, the early ABC papers, for example, there was criticism that you were introducing too much approximation into the models. But then you've got the whole model discrepancy thing, which is coming out of the UQ framework, which is basically saying, well, actually, you should have more uncertainty in your models. And in a sense, you can view ABC as being a kind of model discrepancy-based inference approach, depending on how you want to view it. So the thing is that I don't think anybody quite agrees. So I think there's lots and lots of ideas about how to do things, and people do things in the way that suits their model and perhaps their data set. And so I kind of view like one of the main challenges as being, so one of the key things for me is the fact that it's actually quite difficult, because there's no general purpose software for doing a lot of this stuff. It's quite difficult to, you know, we have all of these methods, but people are developing their own methods because that's what they're used to for doing this particular type of thing. So I think a lot of the challenges are really about accessibility for me. It's about accessibility and scalability. So, you know, that there are some situations where you just would not even consider data augmented MCMC, but there might be other areas when that might be exactly the right thing to do. And so and again, I think depending on people's backgrounds and people's approaches, then there's probably quite a lot of variability in terms of what people think is a good approach to take and what people don't think is a good approach to take. And I don't think that there's going to be a one approach fits all type problem here. So I think a lot of it is, like Valerie says, it's context dependent. And I think a major thing is just getting knowledge of all of these different approaches out there, so that people have a toolbox of things that they can call on. But I certainly think things like ABC have their problems, for example, but they're also very easy to implement. So, you know, again, you've also got that context of, you know, people will use things if there's software, even if those things are not necessarily, or may have other associated problems with them, right? So, you know, badly calibrated ABC is not a good thing at all. But it might allow you to fit a model which is otherwise very difficult to fit. So I think all of these kind of, I don't think it's easy to distill it into kind of small challenges. I think there's this big problem of how do you deal with complex models? How do you deal with complex data? How do you do that in real time? And how do you correctly assess the areas of uncertainty? And there's about 50 different methods for doing that.
I think one of the other
Star Trek.
I think one of the other difficult things is offering advice on how you can make those decisions in a principled way as well, because of most of the methods you're introducing uncertainty in a particular way as well, whether that's through approximate inference, whether it's through approximating stochastic likelihoods, whether it's making various assumptions about exponential waiting times and things like that, for example. So knowing what the implication, I think you're absolutely right, TJ, that often people make decisions because that's what their group do or that's what their background is, rather than thinking what's the actual implications of this on my estimation approach. And, you know, is this a valid decision? Is it a valid approximation or a valid approach to this particular problem and this particular model? And are there, you know, particular biases that we're introducing here? Can we actually measure those? But if we, as you know, users of these methods, can offer advice on how to make those decisions, if we can come up with a set of decisions that need to be made and when they can be made, I think that would be a big advantage to the field, to people who aren't necessarily using these methods widely.
I think the other thing is the like real-time aspect of it. Like even if you have the knowledge, so like we've like been looking at not quite full uncertainty quantification, but just like looking at stuff in the models in a more formalized way. Just like the time aspect of like you can have the knowledge, but if you're starting from scratch with no pre-existing software, you're just not going to be able to do it in a useful time frame. Especially with this sort of expert elicitation, which is going to be most useful right at the start where you've got little data. But like if you're in, say, the end of January and in 2 weeks' time, you need to decide, you know, that's your time frame for like making a decision at most. A lot of this stuff needs to be like pre-done. So like having a complicated structure of a working group for your expert elicitation, maybe that needs to be pre-set up, right? Like Sage and SPI-M, they had like these committees that were sort of standing committees in a way, ready to go. Because otherwise it's just like, by the time you've got your answer, it's too late.
I totally agree with that, Josh. And I think, so quite a lot of this is also about setting up the infrastructure to be able to do this. So, you know, we've had a lot of conversations with the UQ groups about this, about, you know, like particularly about software, actually, the fact that, you know, emulation, for example, has been around for years, but there's no general purpose software for doing it. So it makes it inaccessible, and it means people can't react quickly and use those sorts of techniques unless they already have the infrastructure in place. And I think the elicitation is the same thing. You know, those elicitation approaches exist, but they're not well known amongst the epidemiological community. And I think this is where the point about having an accessible paper that's aimed at the epidemiological community that explains all the processes that have to go in order to do elicitation, for example, would be super, super useful, right? I think, you know, like all of those things, just making people more aware, but also putting the infrastructure in place so that next time people can react faster is a key thing. And I think maybe sort of like Graham Medley's point here is important, right? Which is that in these kind of ongoing outbreaks, you need to have decisions quickly, even if they're not perfect. And so, and the problem with the inference stuff is that the more sophisticated inference approaches typically just take a very long time to set up and a very long time to run. So, and that then also leads into the fact that, you know, perhaps it's better in real time to do an approximate model with a rough inference, and that's better than doing something which is very sophisticated but takes a very long time to run. And so I think, you know, there's pragmatic kind of choices that also are important when you're doing this stuff in real time. And so
I'm just thinking about sorry, Jasmina.
No, please go, Valerie.
I was only say, if you're thinking about recommendations for the future, some of those recommendations would be to put some of the structure in place as much as you can, so that there are things that people ready written, you know, that people can call on, and that might be helpful. Sorry, Jasmina, do please go on.
No, so I just wanted to first of all say I don't disagree from a while back from what you said. I think there is a problem and a challenge that we really have to put in this paper around the technicalities and the expertise of quantifying uncertainty by whatever, everything that TJ said. Like, you have different methods, but not many people use them because they were trying to, I mean, you know, when you're trying to make decisions on a really fast time scale, by the time you develop your very fine-tuned quantifying uncertainty expert elicitation method, the week has passed and you didn't produce your projections. And then you have to kind of do it again for the next week because the data has changed. So these aspects really need to be put in on. I think my understanding from a while back when we talked around this estimation paper, there to have sort of overarching challenges and questions and not necessarily go into full details. And if we wanted to go into details, we go separately on a separate paper. So I still stand by that. And what TJ explicitly said about the existence of methods that haven't always been utilized by epidemiologists, A, because they didn't have time to do it, B, because they didn't have the technical skills, and C, because they simply didn't know they existed, is a really important point to be made in this paper. And if we have a table of these methods that are widely used, that you guys know, then we are ready then to kind of dig into them next time potentially a pandemic happens, and we are ready to go. So I think I see this as the point of this estimation paper.
I think also part of it is building the links between the different communities on some kind of ongoing basis, because like publishing one tutorial paper in the next couple of years on UQ is useful, but probably outdated by the time the next pandemic actually hits. So, you know, like in the epidemiological models, there's all this stuff around doing like seasonal flu forecast challenges, either formally or just people like PHE model seasonal flu every year, and it's their pandemic flu model they're going to use for it. So that, you know, you've got you can do it every year. And I don't know if there's you can fit into these other frameworks so that people know the routines they need to go through, and they're like, at least in theory, they should be well oiled, and then you can deal with the stuff that comes up that's weird because it's a pandemic when it comes to that, but you've got those frameworks in place and they're tested.
I think also alongside that is the fact that it should be clear where the methods work well and where they don't. I think that's the other thing, right? Because not all techniques work well. So often understanding the limitations of those techniques is also important. Like knowing when not to go down the rabbit warren of doing data augmented MCMC, or knowing not when to do emulation, right? Those sorts of things are probably also quite important. So I mean, I think that like these papers are, I think having some discussion about the limitations with the different kinds of approaches is important actually in these sorts of papers, because I think it focuses people's attention on, or at least if they can use them to kind of say, okay, this is the sort of thing that I think is relevant for my problem, then that's also quite helpful. Sorry, Jasmine.
And TJ, do you think one of those aspects is around short-term versus long-term predictions as well? Because I think that is also a key, which I don't like when people give point estimates without a band. And a lot of the time, well, especially for R, they do, or for the generation, the serial interval, blah, blah, blah. So aspects that, are quite crucial were given as point estimates. And I think that, so I mean, a question, do you think there is a point around saying that some methods are better in giving the point estimates if you must give a point estimate, and some methods are better as giving a range?
I don't know.
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah. So my feeling is that, like, I'm not convinced that there's better methods for giving point estimates. I mean, I might argue that if that we should care about uncertainty bounds and we should use the right methods. And, there are methods that will give you a point estimate quickly, but they will do so at the cost of you probably making various assumptions and other bits and pieces. So I don't know. I mean, personally, I kind of feel like you should use the method that's the best method given the constraints that you have. So, if you need to churn out a transmission model and you need to fit it tomorrow for SPI-M, then that's very different. You would clearly then probably use kind of very approximate method to get some ballpark figure. But I think if you had time to do it, you should use the appropriate method. If that method.
And I think, yeah, and I think that's the point. That is a crucial thing, that if we have that method out of the box existing somewhere, as Joshua said, because they use it every year to validate the influenza model at PHE, then we are halfway to predicting it very quickly for SPI-M tomorrow, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
like it was, it's a full like MCMC model, right? So you've got your uncertainty done in a, maybe you've not done all the expert elicitation, but at least it's a proper framework and you've got proper uncertainty that's principled in there, even though, but you can also stand it up in a day.
Just to ask, have I been given a job that something to do and I haven't done it, or have I not been given something specifically?
I have no idea, Jasmine.
Okay, so I will go with I haven't been given anything yet, so that's fine.
I think there was some discussion last week about possibly getting involved with Daniela on the data.
The data one.
And I try to, so just to update on that, I mean, I don't think, so Joshua, you are in their group, is that right?
Yeah, there's not been much progress in the last couple
No,
of weeks,
because I tried to get in touch with both Paul and Daniela, and I was on a call with them for something else, and we ran out of time to discuss this. So I think we need to do that maybe as a sort of important point for next week. And I don't know if you and I, Joshua, can work on it and sort of give something to them, or they work and give something to us. But we need to do that. So
yeah, it's probably worth dropping them another email. It probably just got lost in some pile of something else.
So that's 7.3, isn't it?
And is the point,
right.
Oh, sorry, I haven't got it open. And is the point there around how we sort of do this very quickly and with bearing accuracy in the estimation?
I think the idea of the data one was kind of the problems that kind of arise in the fact that all the data is wrong in some way, basically.
But this is an estimation, not a data paper.
Was this not the data chapter?
Yeah, well, this is the data part of the estimation paper.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Okay.
So in the sort of it goes back quite a long way, but in the outline anyway of the paper, 7.3 is data challenges for quantifying uncertainty with Paul, Daniela, Joshua, TJ, Jasmina, Ben, perhaps. Ben's got a question mark, Glenn. So lots of initials alongside it. But the problem, it says that the bullet points. There were two. One was sort of data issues, problems and challenges of using real world data, and the other was changes over time, challenges posed by the changing nature and quantity of data over the course of the pandemic. So those were the starting point, I suppose, but that might not be the finishing point.
I think maybe what we could write there is sort of addressing those bulletin points from the aspect of bearing in mind what we've just talked about today as challenges of kind of doing it as good as we can in the time frame, or better if we had more time.
Yeah. So if we had that, and the bit that's missing mainly is 7.2, which is on UQ, where we haven't, again, Ben and TJ are attached to this with question marks, but the main people are Peter Challoner, Michael Goldstein, I think, and Ian Vernon. So do we know anything about that one?
No, I mean, I said I'd be happy to work with them on it, but obviously they're the experts in that area. So I think Peter said last week he was going to chase the other two up, and but I haven't seen him this week. We didn't have a meeting.
So maybe we just need to chase that.
Yeah, I know Ian's very busy with everything teaching at the moment. So.
Thank you for your input earlier, Phil, before you arrived. Luke described your efforts. I was querying a bit as to whether some of the stuff, particularly on the food standards thing, and the sort of the context and the background might be part of the expository paper, but I don't know your thoughts on that, whether that would work. You're on mute at the moment, so lips moving, but not much happening.
Yes, I mean, I think it certainly deserves a mention and a reference. Luke thought that we should perhaps put in more detail about it. But I think the point is that there is this enterprise which has been very thorough and apparently very successful, which is a good model to work on. And I agree that we probably don't need to go into too much detail about it for the challenges, but some of it is challenges which have been successfully applied and solved. And in terms of technical, that is to say, there's the technical challenges with the use of the particular methodologies. There are new challenges, of course, which is what we're concerned about, and what we're going to do with epidemics.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So are they, I mean, I suppose if we think about the UQ area, the thought was that although that there was a lack of expository papers which showed how the methods could be applied in an epidemic situation, and is the same true here, that there's a gap there, and if there were a paper that showed how the methods could be used explicitly in something more epidemics oriented, it would help to make people, to make the methods accessible to people.
This being the idea we had of a companion paper.
Exactly. So that's really what I'm asking you, how all this fits together.
Yeah, I mean, that hasn't progressed in many months, but I was really waiting on Will.
Sure.
Who's very busy at the moment, and but he certainly retains his interest. So I think that will happen, but on a fairly slow timescale. I'm not quite sure what our timescale is actually, overall.
We are hoping, and we are hoping to send something round. We talked to the people from Elsevier, who published Epidemics this week. We are hoping that for most papers, it would be possible to aim for a complete draft by about the end of March, so within a couple of months. We have ascertained with them that it will be possible to add, we don't need all the papers to be completed before things can be put into the special issue, and additional papers could go at a later stage. You know, it's not like a physical hard copy volume where at some point the volume is closed. Further papers could be added to the special issue. So
Well,
there is
that seems to me the way this would fit in.
so there is a bit of flexibility. Yeah. So hopefully it could be done. But obviously, in writing this one, which is the specific challenges, one might want to have an idea of, you know, how to refer to that and what was likely to be covered, even if it's a forthcoming paper.
Yeah, fair enough.
If that works. I mean, I'm just throwing it out as it was question more than an instruction.
Yeah, I think something like that probably would work. Although without actually knowing what the content of the other paper will be, because it will depend on the input from lots of people who aren't here, it's a bit difficult to know how to refer to it. Now, having joined late, I'm afraid I must now leave. So apologies for this very brief appearance.
And I was just typing a reply to Ben, who I see has already left. So I won't bother to send it.
So likewise, let me know if there's anything that I'm fingered to do.
Yeah, so what is the next step on this?
Well, I wanted to do some more reading on the specific methodologies, because I think there's an interesting challenge question, just as TJ highlighted for the estimation methods, also for elicitation methods. What methods work and which don't, for what types of questions that we might want to answer in an elicitation procedure.
Yeah, there is a reasonable experience in a number of completely different fields, and the real harder question is how it carries over to our field. Right, I'm going to go. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye, Phil. Thank you. So I think for the rest of us, the only other things are perhaps to chase the UQ people to see if they might be able to produce something fairly soon, given that we do appreciate everybody's horrendously busy, but you know, it'd be good to be back in touch with them anyway, to see what their thinking is about when they might be able to tackle some of this. And the other thing is for us to read the stuff that people have already done, which is Luke and Phil's thing, and the stuff that Ben and TJ have been working on. And also, I suppose, I was talking about chasing the UQ people, but also to hope that the Jasmina and Daniela et al. can push forward with that a bit.
I think we will put that as an action, and Joshua, I really would appreciate kind of chasing that up with Daniela and Paul on your side, and I will do it on my side, and then maybe just we sort of draft something between us. However, for a draft it is for next week. I think we need that done really by then.
I think the more we can get down on paper, virtual paper, even if it is only sort of bullet points and thoughts, is really useful, because then we can show things to other people and say, what have we missed? You know, can you add a small paragraph on something, and so on. But it's always getting started, which is the hardest step.
We'll hope, yeah, let's leave that with us, please, Valerie. We will have something by next week, she says.
Thank you. Thank you, Joshua and Jasmina. And I say thank you to everybody, to Luke and TJ too for that.
No, I will say sorry. The stuff that I've put down was just a brain dump of an idea.
Yeah,
so,
but that's
you know, but so I think that I was trying to focus just on the kind of more traditional challenge with inference. So sort of the outside the UQ bit, right? Because I think it's important to make sure that we get a range of different approaches that are being.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think that was why we thought very much that section 4, I guess it is, 7.4, would be very much not the UQ and the expert elicitation. It was all the rest, which is it's a major area. So.
So I mean, I'm
all the
happy
calibration and validation.
I mean, I'm happy to contribute to the UQ section as well, but I sort of feel like I think Peter and Ian and Michael have a very specific kind of way of writing it, what they want to say. So it's kind of one of those things where I sort of feel like might be useful to put a bit of epidemiological context into it, but you know, I think they need to write it because that you know they have specific things they want to say, and
yes, I think if they can get something down, then you and others could comment from the perspective.
And then maybe link it into the other sections as
exactly.
well. Sort of but yeah, I kind of feel like I'm happy to contribute, but I feel like I'm probably better to contribute once something has been put onto paper rather than trying to put down bullet points that, you know, actually probably Peter and Ian have already got an idea of what they want to do. So I suspect it's just because they're busy and they.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes. I don't think it's a lack of interest. And I know Ian particularly is not only busy with work, but now homeschooling as well, which has rather thrown a lot of people's plans, you know.
I think this is one of the major challenges, isn't it?
It is, yes.
How do you do it?
Most of today homeschooling my granddaughter, so it's.
Yeah. We're very lucky because we're in Cornwall, and so I think our 2 are still in school at the moment.
Oh wow.
But
yeah.
But yeah, I think God knows what we would be doing if they were at home right now. So probably not doing this.
Yeah. Problematic.
I'm gonna have to go.
That's all right. I think we're stopping now. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Jasmina. Thanks for turning up. Thanks. Right. Is there anything else we need to cover? I don't think so. I think it's probably time to let you go.
That with Ben and Glenn and see if I was hoping that Glenn might be able to feed into this, but I think he was. I didn't send it to him till quite late. So
well, he put a post on the Slack channel that said he was held up in another meeting and he didn't think he was going to be able to make it. Yep. So I mean, these things can be done. They don't have to be done in the meeting. They can be done offline anyway. It's mainly just to sort of make sure all the balls are staying up in the air in some way. So that's great. Anyway, thank you. Thank you
very much.
Very much.
Sorry I was late for the meeting. I had it in my head. It was 5:30, and then.
Well, it was. I mean, we've mucked about with this meeting to try and find a time and a day and a time that worked for people, and we did we started with 5, and then we moved it to 5:30. But when we moved it back to Thursday, we also moved it back to 5 o'clock. Right. You know, it's sort of. Anyway.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, thanks. Thanks then.
Get some dinner, but thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.